said about temptation? He said he could resist anything but temptation. I heard of a group of lumberjacks who could not resist temptation. They had not been to confession in years, and they came in, a couple dozen of them, and he sent the bravest of them all into the confessional box first. And he began his confession by saying, "Father, I've committed every sin a man can commit." Father said, "Ever commit murder?" "No," he said, "that's right. That's one sin I never committed." "Well, now," he said, "you see, you haven't committed every sin. Go out of the box, examine your conscience again, number, kind, and circumstance, and then come back." So as he stepped out of the box, he saw the long line of lumberjacks outside. Put up his hand, he said, "No use tonight, boys, just hearing murder cases."
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 44. So this week we are going to be talking about open minds. And I would gather that most people would say that they believe they have an open mind. But there's a good way to have an open mind, and there's a bad way to have an open mind. And that's what Bishop Sheen is going to be talking about today. Our topic is how open minds close. And I think this is, again, a very relevant topic for our times, as is almost every reading. I don't think there has yet been a reading that hasn't been relevant to the times that we're living in. But we're going to jump right in, and our 3 key points are responsibility, duty, and freedom. Number 44, how open minds close. Nothing is more interesting in our social scene than to see how often those who boast of an open mind end with a closed one. People with an infernal pride will sometimes take the lowest places in order to attract attention. So often, those who boast that their minds are in a state of suspension until they find truth are often those who are most impervious to it. The open mind is commendable when it is open like a road that leads to a city which is its destination. But the open mind is condemnable when it is like an abyss or a manhole. Those who boast of their open-mindedness are invariably those who love to search for truth, but not to find it. They love the chase, but not the capture. They admire the footprints of truth, but not catching up with it. They go through life talking about widening the horizons of truth, but without ever seeing the sun. The discovery of truth can be very embarrassing. For example, to awaken at night to discover that we are really very selfish and egotistic. Truth brings with it great responsibilities. That is why so many keep their hands open to welcome it, but never close them to grasp it. The real thinker who is willing to embrace a truth at all costs generally has a double price to pay. First, isolation from current opinion or the mass mind. Anyone who arrives at the moral conclusion that divorce prepares the way for the breakdown of civilization must be prepared to be ostracized by the Herods and the Salomes of this world. Nonconformity with the mass mind can be expected to bring down upon the offender's head opposition and ridicule. Second, those who discover a truth must stand naked before the uplifted stroke of its duties, or else take up the cross that it imposes. These 2 effects of embracing truth, one negative, which is opposition, and the other positive, which is the burden of the new idea, make many people fearful. In their cowardice, they keep their minds open, so they will never have to close on anything that would entail responsibility, duty, moral correction, or altered behavior. This is the reason. The open mind does not want truth because truth implies duty. A farmer's son will avoid passing the woodpile because he knows if he passes it, he ought to bring in some firewood to his mother. That truth creates a duty which he wishes to avoid. Responsibility is the one thing the open mind is most anxious to avoid. Avoiding truth is only negative. People cannot long endure in that attitude. So they seek about for something which will completely relieve them from responsibility. The avoidance of responsibility, though, only results in tyranny, the abdication of one's free will to another, whether it be to an ideology or a dictator. The only real solution is for those with open minds to close on truth, even though it does involve a change in behavior, for ultimately it is truth and only truth which can make them free. Before we get started, I just want to reiterate what Bishop Sheen says about when it is good to have an open mind and when it is bad to have an open mind. He says on page 154, "The open mind is commendable when it is open like a road that leads to a city which is its destination. But the open mind is condemnable when it is like an abyss or a manhole." So yes, it's good to have an open mind, to be able to take in information, to weigh it all out, and then from that information, find what is true, and then continue down the path towards a destination of always seeking out the truth, which ultimately leads us to God. But when our minds are open to just let anything and everything in, and we never land on any truth, that is not commendable. That is condemnable. And your life will just be an ambiguous, like he says, manhole. It'll just be a purposeless abyss. You will have no direction. You will have no principles. It just seems like you would feel constantly lost and just barely keeping your head above water, which is what we see in our world today. So with that in mind, I want to talk about two separate issues. I want to talk about one that's not necessarily personal to me, and then I want to talk about a situation where I discovered the truth of something, and like Bishop Sheen says, I had to alter my behavior. And it was tough because, as he shows us, there are two consequences of accepting truth. And one of them is that you are probably going to face opposition. And the other is that you are going to be forced to change your behavior. At least you should feel the duty and the responsibility to change your behavior. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the existence of God. Now, this is a big topic in our society right now. We know that a lot of people are claiming to be atheists, and probably at some point in your life, you're going to run into one of these atheists. If you haven't already, they're going to be a family member or a close friend, maybe your children. And so we need to understand the arguments for the existence of God, and also understand what those who believe there is no God have to say. So it really comes down to, is there a God? And can we know the truth of that question? And I say yes, especially as a Catholic. The options in front of us are really, there either is a God or there isn't. There's really no other choice. He either exists or he doesn't. I mean, I guess you could say, well, there could be multiple gods, as some religions believe in, but that takes us off on a whole nother tangent, which we're not going to go over today. So if we are going to say that we have an open mind, then when we look at this question of, is there a God? Then we have to look at all the evidence in front of us. And we ultimately have to make a decision based off of that evidence. And if we're truly going to have an open mind, then we will follow what path leads down truth. Not just what we want, but what has the most truth in its argument. So the first argument I want to look at is the teleological argument. This is one of the arguments put forth by Christians to prove the existence of God. And this argument says, when I look around the world, things seem ordered. It looks like there's a plan. It looks like there are laws that are very predictable. We have gravity, people age, things grow and then they die. Everything looks like it's been created. So if I was to walk into a room and I saw a beautiful painting sitting on maybe the kitchen table, I would say, oh my gosh, this is a beautiful painting. Who made this? Who made this? I would never walk into the room and go, wow, this painting must have come out of thin air and just happened by blind chance. I would never, ever say that because the painting looks like it has a creator. It looks like something put effort into it to make it come into existence. And that's what happens when we look around at the world. There's order, there's laws. It looks like there's a plan. It looks like an intelligent mind put things into place. And that intelligent mind we call God. Now, the objection to this put forth by materialists is that, well, the universe just came into being through blind chance. Like, we got really lucky. There was all this matter in the world, and over billions and billions of years, it all ordered itself into what we see today. But we never, ever see that happening in our world. We don't ever see blind chance creating anything. There's always an intelligent being behind it. And so that doesn't really work. And so when looking at those two arguments, either the teleological argument or the blind chance argument, which one has more truth? Well, obviously the teleological argument, because nowhere in the universe do we see the blind chance argument working itself out. We just never see that happening. And so we have to reject it because it just isn't true. If we've never seen it happening, it would literally be more miraculous for us to have this universe created by just blind chance, that we just got lucky after 1 billion years. That would be more miraculous than an intelligent being who created everything. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And so we would have to follow down the teleological argument path, which doesn't conclusively prove God, but it is a source of evidence. And so we can start walking down that path. So do we have any other arguments? Well, yes, we do. We have the cosmological argument. This is an argument that looks at cause and effect. So when we look around our world, we see that every event has a cause. Something causes something to happen. And it ends up being kind of a long chain of causes. This thing causes this thing, but what caused that is something else. And then another cause caused that thing. And we just keep going back in time. But the thing is you cannot have an infinite regress of causes. You can't just have causes going back to infinity or for infinity, or we would never arrive at the place we are today. And now that takes a lot of mental power to think through because it's kind of crazy when you really start thinking about it. But if there was never an actual beginning, then you could never actually get to the point we are at right now. And so the thing that had to start our universe has to be an uncaused cause. It has to be something that owes its existence to nothing. And that thing we call God. And so the objection to this would be, well, all of the matter in the world and everything in the universe has just always been here. But that just doesn't work because matter isn't necessary. It doesn't have to be here. It's not needed. And so therefore it has to have been created and brought into existence. And what atheists can't explain is still their argument is but what's the origin of the matter? Where did it come from? So I'm not going to go too deep into these, but again, we have two arguments. One says, when we look around, we see that there are causes to things. We cannot have an infinite regress of causes. There had to be an uncaused cause that started the universe, started the world in which we live. And the other argument is, well, all that we see around us has just been here for eternity and forever. But that just does not explain how it got here in the first place. It doesn't have a creator. It doesn't have an origin. And that's a problem. And so again, we can travel down the path of truth, especially now we've got two arguments that we just talked about that seem to point to an intelligent being, to a supreme being that we call God. So now I want to move into an area where I was faced with a truth. Now you all know that I used to be Protestant and that I came to the truth of the Catholic Church after following a lot of logic, but I wanted to focus on something else. So back when I was a teenager, back when I was 18, I grew up Protestant. I went through public school, and all through public school, I was told that birth control was perfectly fine and the right thing to do. To be on birth control was the right thing to do. I never heard anybody in my life say otherwise. I never heard anybody question it. I never really had anybody talk to me about it as like an option as far as like it's good or bad or maybe you should consider. I was just told that if you are a responsible person, you use birth control. And so I thought that that was the right thing to do. And so when I was 18, my mom even came in and told me that she felt like I needed to get on birth control. And she didn't really explain to me why or what I should do or anything like that. She just said, I want you to be safe. And so I think you should get on birth control. And I didn't question it. And so I went one day to the county health department. A friend went with me. And I went in and I told the lady that I wanted to get on birth control. And she was just fine with that. She made me fill out a few forms. I was taken back to a room and I met with, I don't even remember if it was a doctor or what. They just asked me a few questions. They didn't take any vitals. They didn't ask any medical history. Nothing, really. And they provided very little information. And the next thing I knew, I had a little brown bag with like 3 months worth of pills inside and I was sent on my way. And so I went home and I started taking them and I didn't really think about it. And I took them for years. And the first time I started to have doubts about birth control was when I was dating who would become my husband. We weren't chaste. We did end up having a daughter out of wedlock. I'm not condoning that in any fashion. I'm just telling you my story so you can see how the truth of things led me down a certain path. But I was on birth control while we were dating, and I started to get extremely sick. I mean, really sick. Like one time we went out to dinner with some friends, and I went to the bathroom because I was not feeling well. And I basically ended up on the floor. I was like foaming at the mouth. I was disoriented. I didn't know what was going on. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, we went to the hospital and they didn't really know what was wrong with me. And this episode happened a few times and I was getting concerned. And one day I was in the bathroom and I was looking at my pack of birth control pills and I started reading through the side effects. And as I was reading through it, I was like, wow, I have that and that. And I experienced this and this and this. And I was like, whoa, this is what's wrong with me. It's these are hurting me. And so I went to the campus health center And I explained what was going on. I was like, I think these pills are bad for me. And the nurse there was like, oh, maybe the prescription is too strong. You just need a lighter prescription. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's it. And so they put me on a lower dose birth control pill. But again, I wasn't feeling good. I didn't feel right. And I ended up getting pregnant while on birth control, which most women do have that experience. And after the birth of our daughter, I went to like my follow-up appointment with my doctor. And while I was there, I expressed to him that I wanted to get on birth control. And he said, well, I don't provide birth control. And I kind of looked at him like, what? And he's like, well, I'm a Catholic and I don't prescribe that to anybody. And I didn't ask any questions, but I was like, why? Why can't a Catholic give me birth control? It just didn't make any sense to me. It was such a foreign idea. But I did have my conscience pricked because I was curious. What has this guy got against birth control? I mean, it's the responsible thing to do, right? It's what I've been told my whole life. But I didn't dig into it or anything like that. Years go on. I'm still using it. My husband and I decide, we want to try for another child. So, of course, I stopped taking birth control and I get pregnant with our second daughter and she comes into the world. And then I want to get back on birth control. And so I do this low dose birth control. And I was at work one day and I started to get this really bad pain in my left arm up near my heart by my shoulder. And it really scared me. And because of my experience with birth control pills in the past, I got online and I started looking it up. And I read that if you're like experiencing this pain by your heart in your left arm, if you're on birth control, that's really bad and super dangerous. I called my husband at work and I told him, I was like, I'm having this pain and this is what it says online. And he's like, you got to stop taking these. You've got to stop taking these. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to end up having like 10 kids. And he's like, I don't know what we're going to do, but we can't have you taking these anymore. It's too dangerous. So that started my husband and I on a journey. I mean, my husband was a cradle Catholic, but he grew up in the same type of worldly environment that I did, where everybody just talked about the joys and the wonders and all of that of birth control. And so we just never really questioned it because we'd never heard the other side. And so I stopped taking the birth control pills and I got pregnant and we lost that baby. And I would go on to lose 7 more kids after that first miscarriage that we experienced. And it was devastating. In all, we have lost 10 children. And a part of me wonders if it was those synthetic hormones that I was pumping into my body for years. I've wondered many times if that caused a kind of secondary infertility. I can't know for positive. I do know that I had low progesterone. And I do know that birth control pills screw with your hormones. And so I do wonder about that. But during all this time, of having so many miscarriages and not taking birth control pills anymore and trying to figure out what does the church teach? Because again, about this time, I was also discerning coming into the Catholic Church. And that's when I first got introduced to natural family planning. And both my husband and I were completely oblivious to it. Neither one of us had really ever heard anything about it. I mean, maybe in the periphery of our lives, but we knew nothing about it. And we started going down that path. And I started to see the wisdom of the Catholic Church with regards to birth control. And I'm not going to go into all the details and I'm not going to go in and explain natural family planning. But as I was going down this path, and really what opened my mind was the fact that I was getting so sick. And so because I was getting so sick, I wasn't so stuck in, being a pro birth control advocate anymore. I knew something was wrong and I needed to find answers. And so that really opened my mind, and I wanted to have a destination. I wanted to find out what was the truth of all of this. And so I started walking down a path. And as I walked down the path, I learned more and more and more. And then I discovered what the Catholic Church taught. And my eyes were opened to an argument against birth control that had never, ever been introduced to me until into my 30s. And I felt so gypped. I was very angry that I was not taught the beauty of the female body and how it tells you it's signs of fertility and all of these things. I was never taught any of that. I mean, my body was basically a mystery to me, but yet God gives us amazing clues and signs to understand our bodies, and all of that was masked by birth control. And so as I came to the truth of all of this, there was a responsibility for me to change my behavior and to not advocate for birth control of any kind anymore, because life is precious and life is sacred, and we should not be closed off. Obviously, each couple has to discern the size of their family. I'm not here to argue that in any way, but the point is that my eyes were opened, and I had a duty now to live in a different way. And I'm so grateful because I'm not poisoning myself anymore. I'm not thwarting the purposes of the marital act. And it's just overall made my life and my marriage better. I truly believe that. So those were just two examples I just wanted to share with you, just arguments for God's existence and my personal experience with coming to the truth about birth control. But with anything really, we have to understand that our goal should be the truth. We should start down on that path, and we can throw away things that are not true. If we look at the arguments and we realize, this is illogical, it's not based in reality, we can toss it away. We don't have to hang on to it. We don't have to acknowledge it. Nothing. We toss it away. We continue on our path. We look at the next thing that's presented to us. We weigh all the options. We look at it with a logic, intelligent, curious minds. We find what is true. We discard what isn't true, and we continue on the path. So that is the appropriate way to have an open mind. And ultimately, that will always lead us to God and to joy and to living our best Catholic life. So that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 45. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.